My name is Anna, and for almost 2 years I've been playing a role, the perfectly supportive, blissfully quiet wife. When I married Marcus, I didn't just marry the man of my dreams, I married his entire, old money, coastal New England family. And at the head of that family sits his mother, Genevieve, a woman who smiles like a porcelain doll and attacks with the precision of a surgeon. I used to be a different person. For 8 years, I was a senior prosecutor in the New York County DA's office. My job was to build ironclad cases, to find the single thread that could unravel a criminal's entire defense. I was good at it. I was tough. I was relentless. And I never, ever lost a case I took to trial. But I burned out. The stress, the darkness, the constant fight. It wore me down. Marrying Marcus and moving to his family's breathtaking estate in Maine was supposed to be my escape. A new, quiet life. A chance to finally breathe, to be soft, to be just Anna. Genevieve saw this new, softer Anna as a golden opportunity. She saw my retired career not as a choice, but as a weakness. She saw me as a simple, unimpressive girl from a middle-class background who had gotten lucky. For the past year, she has been running a quiet, devastating campaign to destroy my marriage from the inside, to paint me as unstable, incompetent, and unworthy of her son. She wants to replace me. She's about to make a critical, fatal mistake. She forgot that a prosecutor, even a retired one, never stops seeing the patterns. She forgot that I'm trained to spot a lie, to follow a paper trail, and to build a case. And I've just found the first thread. She thinks she's just pushing me out. She has no idea I'm about to uncover a secret so dark, so rotten, that it will bring her entire, carefully constructed world crashing to the ground. She thinks I'm just Anna. She forgot who I used to be. Hey everyone, if you've ever felt underestimated, or had to fight for your place in a family that just didn't see you, then you are going to want to see how this ends. This one gets messy, and honestly the revenge is pretty sweet. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments, what's the most two-faced thing a family member has ever said to you? Buckle up. This is a wild ride. Marrying Marcus Devereaux was like stepping into a painting. One of those old, grand oil paintings that hangs in a museum, beautiful and breathtaking from a distance. But up close, you can see all the tiny cracks in the varnish. The Devereaux family wasn't just wealthy, they were old money. The kind of quiet, powerful wealth that doesn't just own businesses, it owns towns. Their ancestral home, a sprawling stone and shingle mansion called Seacliff, sat on a rugged private peninsula in Maine. It wasn't a house, it was a compound. It had a name, a staff, and more history than most small countries. And I, Anna Reed, a girl from a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, whose parents were a teacher and a plumber, was now, somehow, a Devereaux. My life before Marcus felt like a different lifetime, a different person. For 8 years, I was an assistant district attorney in Manhattan. My world was the gritty, fluorescent lit, and relentless grind of the criminal justice system. I lived on stale coffee, adrenaline, and the cold, hard satisfaction of putting bad people away. I was good at it. I was great at it. I was known for being a bulldog in the courtroom, a lawyer who could take a seemingly hopeless case, find the one tiny overlooked piece of evidence, and build an ironclad, inescapable narrative around it. But the work was a furnace, and it had burned me down to the studs. The last case, a brutal, soul-crushing child abuse trial, had broken something in me. I was done. I was 33, exhausted, and my light had gone out. Then I met Marcus at a mutual friend's chaotic art gallery opening. He was quiet, kind. He was a history professor at Columbia, the academic's son, who had, to his family's mild confusion, chosen books over banking. He didn't just see my burnout, he saw me underneath it. He was the first person in a decade who had made me feel safe. When he asked me to marry him and move to his family's home in Maine, to just rest and figure out what's next, it felt like a rescue. I resigned from the DA's office, packed up my small New York apartment, and walked away from the only identity I had ever known. I was ready to be just Anna. The matriarch of Seacliff, the queen of this new, alien world, was Genevieve Devereaux. On the surface, she was perfect. Always impeccably dressed in understated cashmere and pearls, her silver hair pulled into a flawless chignon, her voice a soft, melodic, old-money whisper. She was the chair of half a dozen major charities, her face a staple on the society pages. Her smile, however, was like a porcelain teacup with a tiny, hairline crack. It was beautiful, but it didn't quite hold water. From the moment I arrived, I was a project. A curiosity, a sweet, simple thing her son had brought home, like a stray puppy. "Welcome to Seacliff, dear," she said, greeting me in the grand, two-story foyer. She kissed the air beside my cheek. What an adventure for you. She looked at my practical, sensible suitcase, and then at the centuries-old oil paintings on the wall. You'll find we're much quieter here than in the city. I do hope you won't be bored. The implication was clear. I was too simple for her world, and her world would be too dull for me. I was determined to fit in. I was tired of fighting. I wanted this new, quiet life to work, so I suppressed the prosecutor. I hid the part of me that analyzed every word for subtext, that mentally cross-examined everyone I met. I smiled. I was agreeable. I made myself small, hoping to be accepted. And Genevieve, seeing this, took her first, calculated shot. It was at our first family dinner, a formal affair in a dining room that could have seated 30. Marcus's father, Arthur, a stoic, quiet man who seemed to exist in his wife's shadow, was there, along with Marcus's sister and her husband. Genevieve raised her glass. A toast, she said, her smile fixed on me. To Anna. How truly brave of you to walk away from a real career, dear. To choose a simpler path. Not many women of your generation would have the courage to just stop. Brave, simpler path. Just stop. The words were coated in sugar, but the core was pure acid. She had just, in front of the entire family, framed my burnout and my new life as a form of quitting. A failure. I saw Marcus frown slightly, but he didn't say anything. I just smiled, my cheeks burning. Thank you, Genevieve. I'm just so happy to be here. This became the pattern. Every interaction was a tiny, precisely placed needle. When I wore a simple black dress to a neighborhood cocktail party, she'd touch my arm and say, "That's such a practical dress, Anna. You remind me of our lovely staff." When I offered to help her organize a guest list for a political fundraiser, she laughed gently. "Oh, darling, that's so sweet. But this is a bit more complex than a witness list. Why don't you just enjoy the gardens?" She was building a narrative. I was simple. I was out of my depth. I was incompetent. I was just Anna. And I, desperate to keep the peace, desperate to prove to Marcus that I could fit in, I let her. I smiled, I deferred, I retreated. I was so focused on being the perfect wife that I didn't realize I was also being the perfect victim. The first 6 months of my marriage were a masterclass in subtle psychological warfare, and I was losing badly. Genevieve's tactics were never overt. There was no yelling, no grand, dramatic confrontations. That wasn't her style. She was a sniper, not a brawler. Her weapon was the whisper, the polite omission, the concerned observation. She was methodically and brilliantly isolating me, not just from the family, but from Marcus himself. It started with small things. I'd come downstairs in the morning, and she and Marcus would be in the breakfast nook, finishing a conversation that would stop the second I entered. "Oh, good morning, Anna," Genevieve would say, smiling brightly. "Marcus and I were just discussing some dull old family business. You don't need to be bored with it." Marcus would give me a quick, distracted kiss, and then head to his study, leaving me standing there, an outsider in my own home. Then came the accidents. I was added to the family group text, the one where they coordinated all the complex Devereaux social logistics. But my messages, somehow, just didn't go through. I'd miss an informal brunch or a last-minute plan to go sailing. "Oh dear," Genevieve would say, looking at my phone with feigned confusion. "That's so strange. Your phone must be on the fritz. You really should have Marcus get you a new one." The implication, always, was that I was the one who was disorganized, that I was the one dropping the ball, that my technology, like my background, was not quite up to their standards. The most effective weapon, however, was her concern. She began to cultivate this narrative that I was fragile, depressed, and struggling to adapt. She would pull Marcus aside, just within my earshot, her voice a low, worried murmur. "Darling, I'm just so worried about Anna. She seems so adrift. She spends so much time alone in her room. Is she bored? I hope she doesn't resent you for taking her away from her exciting life in New York." And it was working. I was spending more time alone because I was trying to avoid her. I was quiet and withdrawn at dinner parties because I was terrified of saying the wrong thing and being publicly corrected again. My exhaustion from 8 years at the DA's office had been replaced by a new, more insidious exhaustion, the constant, 24/7 stress of walking on eggshells. I saw the shift in Marcus. He was still loving, but his love was now tinged with a new, unwelcome emotion, pity. He started treating me like I was a patient. "Are you feeling okay today, honey?" he'd ask, his eyes full of a worried concern that felt suffocating. "Genevieve said you seemed a little down." "I'm fine, Marcus," I'd insist, forcing a smile. "I'm just tired." "Maybe you should, I don't know, find a hobby, he suggested gently. Mom thought you might enjoy joining her garden club. Just to, get out of the house, meet people, a hobby, a garden club. I used to cross-examine murderers. Now I was being offered petunias as a cure for my malaise. But I knew, instinctively, that if I protested, if I got angry, if I tried to explain that his mother was the source of my stress, I would be proving their point. I would be the unstable, difficult wife who couldn't handle their world. So I did the worst thing possible. I tried to compensate. I decided to prove my worth, to show them I wasn't just a simple, bored housewife. I offered to help Genevieve with the one thing that mattered most to her, the annual Devereaux Family Foundation Charity Gala. It was the biggest, most exclusive philanthropic event in the state, and I had just volunteered to walk straight into her trap. The Devereaux Family Foundation was Genevieve's crown jewel. It was the source of her immense social power, her iron-fisted control over the state's cultural and political landscape. And the annual gala was her coronation, a night where hundreds of the wealthiest, most powerful people in New England gathered to pay tribute to her and her generosity. When I offered to help, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a brief, cold gleam of strategic opportunity. She had been waiting for this. "Why, Anna, darling, what a wonderful idea," she said, her voice dripping with false surprise. "I wasn't sure you'd be up for it, given how tired you've been. But yes, of course. We'd be lucky to have you. In fact, I have the perfect job for you. A small, but very important one." My small but important job was managing the silent auction's crown jewel display. Every year, a high-profile jeweler donated a spectacular, headline-grabbing piece. This year, it was a breathtaking pair of teardrop sapphire and diamond earrings, valued at over $100,000. My sole responsibility was to liaise with the jeweler, receive the earrings, log them into our tracking system, ensure their security in the display case, and manage the bidding. It was a high-stakes, high-visibility task, perfectly designed for a public failure. I didn't care. I was the old Anna again, the prosecutor. This was a case, and I was going to build an ironclad record. I documented everything. I created a digital chain of custody that would have made my old DA proud. I had signed receipts from the jeweler. I had time-stamped photos of me receiving the earrings. I had a detailed log of me checking the serial numbers against the appraisal documents. I was meticulous. I was perfect. The day of the gala, I oversaw the placement of the earrings in the custom-built, high-security glass display case. I locked the case myself with its unique, high-security key. Then, as per the security protocol Genevieve herself had written, I was to hand the key over to her personal assistant, a nervous, perpetually flustered young woman named Frances. I found Frances near the catering entrance. "Here's the key to the main display, Frances," I said, holding it out. "I'm logging the transfer to you as of 3:15 p.m. Frances looked terrified. "Oh no, Mrs. Devereaux. I mean Anna. Mrs. Devereaux. Genevieve, she meant, changed the protocol this morning. She told me you were to retain the key personally. She said she wanted you to have full ownership of the project." This was new, a last-minute change, a red flag. "She told you that directly?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Yes, ma'am. In an email this morning. She said you were to be the sole key holder." I stood there, my mind racing. This felt wrong. "Okay, Frances," I said, thinking fast. "No problem." I pulled out my phone. "I'm just going to send you a quick text for my records, confirming this." "All right. Per Genevieve's instructions, I am retaining the key for the crown jewel display." Just reply, "Okay." So I have a time-stamped confirmation. Frances looked confused by the formality, but she nodded. "Okay." I sent the text. A second later, my phone buzzed. Okay. I had my proof. I had my chain of custody. I slipped the key into the small, zippered pocket of my purse and went to get ready. The gala was a sea of black ties and couture gowns. I felt a surge of pride. The display looked beautiful. I had done my job. Marcus, seeing me in my element, seemed to relax for the first time in months. He squeezed my hand. "You did an amazing job, Anna," he whispered. "See? I knew you'd find your footing." The silent auction was to open at 9 p.m. At 8:45, Genevieve approached me, her face a mask of serene calm. "Anna, darling, it's time to open the display. The jeweler would like to say a few words. Do you have the key?" "Of course," I said. I reached into my purse, into the zippered pocket, and my blood turned to ice. It was empty. The key was gone. "What is it, dear?" Genevieve's voice was laced with a sweet, terrible concern. I don't understand," I stammered, my hand shaking as I frantically tore through my small clutch. "It was right here." I put it in the zippered pocket. You lost it?" she asked, her voice rising just enough for the people nearby to turn. "Anna, You lost the key to the sapphire earrings? No, I mean, it must have fallen out, I said, my mind racing. A pickpocket? No, I hadn't left my purse. My goodness, Genevieve said, her hand flying to her chest. The jeweler is waiting. What are we going to do? The commotion was drawing a crowd, including Marcus, whose face had gone pale. We'll have to get the security guard to break the case, Genevieve announced to the room. I am so sorry, everyone. A small logistical hiccup. The guard came over, a large, sheepish man. He used a special tool to break the lock on the $10,000 display case. The glass door swung open, and Genevieve gasped, a high-pitched theatrical sound. Oh my God, she whispered. The small, velvet pedestal inside was empty. The sapphire earrings were gone. The aftermath of the gala was a slow-motion car crash. It was catastrophic. The whispers started immediately. The new wife, the former lawyer, so careless. Or worse, the unspoken but heavily implied. Or was it intentional? The jeweler was apoplectic, threatening lawsuits. The family friend who had donated the earrings was furious. Her trust in the foundation shattered. And I was at the center of the inferno, the sole, designated scapegoat. I don't understand, Anna. Marcus yelled at me in the car on the way home, the first time he had ever raised his voice to me. Your one single job was to watch that key. How could you be so incompetent? I don't know. I cried, the tears a mixture of humiliation and pure, unadulterated rage. I had it, Marcus. I put it in my purse, and it was gone. I think someone took it. I think I was set up. He just stared at me, his face a mask of cold disappointment. Set up? By who? Anna, listen to yourself. You sound paranoid. You lost it. Just own it. My mother is in there, trying to do damage control for your mistake. That was the breaking point. I realized, in that moment, that he would always choose his mother's narrative over mine. I was the outsider. I was the unstable one. Genevieve had won. The following weeks were a blur of cold shoulders and quiet, suffocating isolation. I was a pariah in my own home. Marcus was distant, sleeping in a separate room, claiming he needed, quote, space to think. My father-in-law, Arthur, just looked at me with a silent, heavy disappointment. And Genevieve was the picture of tragic, long-suffering grace. She would float through the house, sighing heavily, talking on the phone in hushed, pained tones about the terrible scandal and the unfortunate lapse that had tarnished the foundation's name. She never accused me directly. She didn't have to. She had created a vacuum of trust, and everyone had rushed to fill in the blanks with my guilt. My old self, the prosecutor, was screaming at me. This is a frame job. Fight back. Investigate. But the new Anna, the wife who just wanted her life back, was too broken, too exhausted. I had no proof. My text to Francis just proved I had the key, not that it was stolen. I was trapped. Then, Genevieve made her next, brilliant move. She brought in the replacement. Her name was Isabel. Isabel was the daughter of one of Genevieve's oldest friends from Boston. She was 35, stunningly beautiful, single, and a high-powered partner at a Boston law firm. She was, in every conceivable way, the woman I used to be, but better, shinier, wealthier, safer. She was invited for an extended stay at Seacliff, ostensibly to help Genevieve with the legal fallout from the gala. This was, of course, a complete lie. The foundation's insurance had covered the loss of the earrings, and the jeweler, placated by a massive donation from Arthur, had backed off. No, Isabel was not there as a lawyer. She was there as an audition. Genevieve threw a large dinner party to officially welcome her. The entire night was a brutal, relentless, side-by-side comparison. Isabel just won a massive case against that pharmaceutical giant. You must have read about it. Genevieve would announce to the table, her eyes sparkling. Oh, Anna, she'd then say, turning to me with that pitying smile. You used to be a lawyer too, didn't you, dear? A prosecutor in New York? So stressful. I'm so glad you found a quieter life. Isabel, for her part, was sharp, witty, and completely charming. She and Marcus hit it off immediately. They talked about case law, about judicial appointments, about the nuances of corporate litigation. I watched my husband, laugh in a way I hadn't seen him laugh in months, his eyes bright with an intellectual spark I hadn't realized was missing. He was looking at her, really looking at her, in a way he hadn't looked at me since I had failed him. I sat at the other end of the table, a ghost at the feast, invisible. I was no longer just the incompetent wife. I was now the boring wife, the simple one, the before picture. And Isabel was the after. That night, after the party, I stood on the cold, dark terrace, overlooking the ocean. I watched Marcus and Isabel through the window, still talking by the fireplace, a little too close, laughing. Genevieve was watching them too, from the other side of the room, a small, satisfied smile on her face. She had done it. She had successfully discredited me, isolated me, and was now presenting the upgraded model. I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not sadness, not despair. The fog of my grief and exhaustion finally burned away, replaced by a pure, cold, and utterly magnificent rage. The prosecutor was back. The game was on. And I was no longer the defendant. I was the one building the case. And I was going to find out what really happened to those earrings, if it was the last thing I did. My training kicked in. The first rule of any investigation: don't let the suspect know they're a suspect. The next morning, I apologized. It was the hardest, most disgusting performance of my life. I went to Genevieve's study, my eyes red. I'd pinched the skin under my eyes to make them water, and I broke down. "Genevieve, I am so sorry," I whispered, letting my voice shake. I don't know how it happened. I've been so foggy lately. You were right. I have been overwhelmed. I'm just so ashamed I let you down." It was exactly what she wanted to hear. Her face softened into a mask of magnanimous forgiveness. "Oh, my dear, dear Anna," she said, patting my hand. "Of course, we forgive you. We were just worried. Perhaps this is a sign you need to take more time for yourself. Just rest. Don't you worry your pretty little head about a thing." I had been officially dismissed, relegated to the role of a fragile, harmless idiot. Perfect. Now that I was resting, I had all the time in the world to conduct my investigation. My first target, Frances, the terrified personal assistant. I knew Genevieve had coerced her, but I needed hard proof. Frances was my star witness, and I had to flip her. I couldn't approach her at Seacliff. Genevieve was always watching. I had to find her in the wild. I ran a simple background check. Frances lived in a small rental apartment in town, was 24, and had a lot of student loan debt. She was vulnerable. She was also, I discovered, a regular at a small, independent coffee shop. I accidentally ran into her there 3 days later. The $250,000 quarterly payment, that was the blackmail. But the earring theft was new. That was an unscheduled payment. Julian must have demanded more. He must have had a new, more urgent threat. The gala, with its high-profile guests and press, was the perfect time to threaten to expose her. She had panicked. She had staged the theft, using me as a scapegoat to get an untraceable high-value asset, the $100,000 earrings, to the scarred man, Julian's courier, to buy his silence. I now had the how, blackmail, the who, her brother Julian, and the why, her own criminal past. I had the entire, sordid, beautiful, and utterly devastating case. I had the text from Frances, proving Genevieve staged the theft. I had the bank records for the $10,000 hush money from Riftwater Strategies. I had the Foundation's 990s, showing the $1.2 million annual bleed to Thorne Consulting. And I had the court-sealed secret of her past, the one that proved she was a co-conspirator, not a victim. I finally understood. Genevieve's cruelty towards me wasn't just about social standing. It was about fear. She was terrified of me from the second I walked in the door. Not because I was from Queens, but because I was a prosecutor. I was the one person in her perfect, placid world who was professionally trained to spot a lie, to follow a money trail, to see the cracks in a carefully constructed facade. She hadn't been trying to push me out because I was simple. She had been trying to discredit me, to paint me as unstable and incompetent before I had a chance to get too close, before I could ever put my legal mind to work on her pristine, perfect, and utterly fraudulent life. She had to make sure that if I ever did find something, no one, especially Marcus and Arthur, would ever believe me. It was a brilliant strategy. It had almost worked, but she had underestimated me. She had pushed me so hard that she had forced me to do the one thing she feared most: investigate. Now I had a choice. I could go to Marcus, to Arthur, and lay it all out, destroying the family, his mother, and our marriage in one fell swoop. Or I could wait. I could hold these cards, this nuclear weapon, and wait for the perfect moment. The replacement, Isabel, was still at the house. Marcus was still distant. Genevieve, feeling she had won, was back to her old self, treating me with a cloying, pitying condescension. She thought I was a solved problem. She thought I was a broken, defeated girl. She had no idea I was a prosecutor who had just finished her closing argument and was now just waiting for the right moment to deliver it to the jury. The perfect moment, I decided, would be the annual Devereaux Family Foundation board meeting. It was the one time all the key players were required to be in the same room, seated around the same 20-foot mahogany table. Arthur Devereaux, the stoic patriarch and foundation president. Genevieve, the untouchable chairwoman. Marcus, my husband, who sat on the board with a vague inherited sense of duty. And me, Anna Devereaux, who held a non-voting board seat by virtue of my marriage. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I had 1 week to prepare my case. I didn't just need the evidence. I needed a narrative. I needed to present my findings in a way that was so logical, so irrefutable, that it would dismantle Genevieve's entire defense before she could even speak. I spent that week in my study, my door locked, my old legal pads filling up with notes, timelines, and flowcharts. I was back in my element. I was building a case against the most dangerous criminal I had ever faced, my mother-in-law. I created a single, devastatingly simple binder. It was divided into 5 sections, each with a clear, numbered tab. Tab 1, the gala theft. This contained Frances's sworn, notarized affidavit. I'd had her sign one, with the promise of protection from Uncle Ben, detailing Genevieve's coercion. It included the time-stamped text message confirming I had retained the key, and Frances's testimony that Genevieve had taken the key, removed the earrings, and handed them to a scarred man at the service entrance. Tab 2, the cover-up. This contained the bank records for Riftwater Strategies LLC, showing the $10,000 hush money payment to Frances, clearly linking Genevieve to a pattern of coercion and cover-ups. Tab 3, the blackmail mechanism. This contained the Foundation's 990 tax forms, with the millions of dollars in payments to Thorne Consulting Group highlighted in bright yellow. It also contained the corporate registration for Thorne, linking it directly to Julian Thorne, her brother. Tab 4, the motive. This contained the 20-year-old archived news articles and court records detailing the original political bribery scandal, Julian's conviction, and the specific mention of the unnamed co-conspirator who had secured immunity. Tab 5, the unspoken truth. This was the final, nuclear option, the one I would only use if I absolutely had to. It was a certified copy of a birth certificate I had paid a PI to pull from her hometown's county records. A child, born to Genevieve Thorne, 2 years before her marriage to Arthur. The father's name listed on the line, Julian Thorne. I had it all. The motive, the means, the opportunity, the cover-up, and the original sin. The day before the meeting, Genevieve, in a final, arrogant power move, had Isabel, the replacement lawyer, formally invited to sit in on the meeting as her new, quote, personal counsel. She was solidifying her new alliance, preparing to make her final move against me. She had no idea I was about to set the entire board on fire. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully, not in one of my simple practical dresses. I wore my old uniform, a razor-sharp, dark charcoal gray suit, a crisp white silk blouse, and my highest black heels. I pulled my hair back into a severe, tight bun. When I walked downstairs, Marcus stopped and stared. He hadn't seen this version of me since our early days of dating in New York. "Anna," he said, "you look incredible. But isn't that a little formal for a board meeting?" "It's exactly appropriate for the conversation we're about to have," I said, picking up my leather briefcase. For the first time in months, he looked at me not with pity, but with a flicker of his old, familiar awe, and a new, dawning flicker of fear. We gathered in the formal dining room at 10 a.m. It was all very civilized. Coffee was served in paper-thin china cups. Arthur Devereaux, my father-in-law, sat at the head of the table. Genevieve sat at the opposite end, radiating power. Marcus and I sat on one side, and Isabel, the guest counsel, sat on the other, her own leather portfolio open, looking smug. "Well," Arthur began, "if we're all settled. Genevieve, the floor is yours. I believe you have a new motion to propose regarding the board's structure." "Thank you, Arthur," Genevieve said, smiling that cold, porcelain smile. "As you all know, our foundation has recently weathered a difficult public incident." She glanced at me with feigned sadness. "The unfortunate event at the gala, which has caused no small amount of complications." She shuffled her papers. "It has become clear that, for the Foundation's security and reputation, we must ensure all board members are, shall we say, fully competent and emotionally stable. Therefore, I am proposing a motion to have Anna's non-voting seat formally rescinded, pending a time when she feels more herself." It was the kill shot. She was publicly declaring me unstable and incompetent, using the very scandal she had created as the weapon. Marcus tensed beside me, starting to speak, but I put a calm hand on his arm. "Thank you, Genevieve," I said, my voice cutting through the room, clear and cold. Every eye turned to me. The soft Anna was gone. The prosecutor was in the chair. That's a very interesting motion. But before we vote on my competence, I have a few items for the record under old business. A few financial irregularities I'd like to see clarified. I stood up and placed my binder on the table, opening it to the first tab. My first item, I said, concerns the gala itself, specifically the unfortunate event of the missing earrings. I slid the notarized affidavit from Francis across the table to Arthur. This is a sworn statement from your assistant Genevieve, detailing how you coerced her into lying. It confirms that you took the key from her, you removed the earrings, and you staged the entire theft. The incompetence you're referring to was, in fact, a fabrication of your own design. Genevieve's smile froze. Arthur's face darkened as he read the affidavit. Genevieve, he said, his voice a low rumble. What is the meaning of this? It's absurd, she scoffed, though a high-pitched note of panic had entered her voice. That girl is a disgruntled employee. She's lying, is she? I replied, moving to tab 2. Then perhaps you can explain this. I slid the bank record for Riftwater Strategies across the table. This shows a $10,000 wire transfer from your private shell corporation, Riftwater, to Francis's personal bank account 2 days after the gala. Was that a, quote, severance payment? Or was it hush money? Genevieve was white as a sheet. Marcus was staring at his mother in dawning horror. Isabel, the sharp lawyer, had stopped taking notes and was just watching, her eyes wide. And now, I said, moving to tab 3. Let's talk about the real reason you needed a distraction at the gala. Let's talk about Thorne Consulting Group. I slid the 990 tax forms in front of Arthur. I'm sure you're aware, Arthur, as foundation president, that your wife has been paying this, quote, consulting group over $1.2 million a year from the foundation's charitable fund. Were you also aware that Thorne Consulting is a shell corporation registered to a P.O. box in the Caymans? Arthur looked at the highlighted lines, then at his wife. Genevieve, it's a strategic partnership, she stammered. Is it? I said, moving to tab 4. Because I was under the impression it was a decades-long blackmail payment. I slid the corporate registration for Thorne next to the 990s. The sole proprietor, as you can see, is a Mr. Julian Thorne. Your brother, the one you told this family, had died in a boating accident in 1998. He's very much alive, Arthur. And he's been bleeding this foundation dry for 20 years, with Genevieve's full cooperation. My God, Arthur whispered, his face ashen. What did he have on you, Mom? Marcus asked, his voice shaking. What could be worth this? Francis? I said, feigning surprise. Oh my goodness, hi. She froze, spilling her coffee, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. Mrs. Devereaux. Anna, hi, please, I said, grabbing a handful of napkins. I'm not going to bite. Let me buy you a new coffee. I didn't accuse. I empathized. That was the first rule of witness prep. Look, I said, once we were settled at a back table. I know this is awkward, and I want you to know, I'm not mad at you, Francis. I know exactly the kind of pressure Genevieve can put on people. She put you in an impossible position, didn't she? Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know what to do, she whispered. She told me to lie. She said if I didn't back up her story, she'd make sure I was fired, and that I'd never work in this state again. I have loans. I have to help my mom. I know, I said soothingly. She threatened your livelihood. That's coercion. That's a crime, by the way. But I'm not here to get you in trouble. I'm here to offer you a way out. A way out? I'm building a case, Francis. A case against Genevieve. I'm a lawyer. Or I was. I know what I'm doing. But I need your testimony. I need proof. She was terrified. I can't. She'll destroy me. She'll destroy you anyway, I said, my voice gentle but firm. The moment you are no longer useful to her, she will discard you. You know that. I'm offering you a different option. Help me, and I will not only protect you, I will make sure your testimony is part of a, shall we say, very generous severance package funded by the Devereaux Foundation itself once I'm on the board. I was bluffing, but it was a good bluff. I just need the truth. What really happened to those earrings? She cracked. It all came pouring out. Genevieve had approached her an hour after I'd given her the key confirmation text. She'd demanded the key. When Francis hesitated, Genevieve had subtly reminded her that her mother's nursing home was a major recipient of the Devereaux Foundation's charitable grants. It was a veiled, brilliant threat. Francis had handed over the key. She took the earrings herself? I asked. Yes, Francis whispered. She told me to misplace the auction tracker logs for an hour and to just play dumb. She said it was a little insurance for a family matter. She said she'd handle you. And then she gave the earrings to a man. My blood went cold. A man? Who? I don't know, Frances said, shaking her head. He was waiting in a car at the service entrance. He looked rough. Not her usual type. He had a scar. Here. She drew a line down her cheek. Genevieve just handed him the box. He didn't say anything. He just took it and drove off. This was new. This wasn't just about framing me. This was something else. She had staged a theft to hand off a $100,000 pair of earrings to a mysterious, scarred man. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. This was a crime. Do you have anything else? I pressed. A text? An email? Anything? She hesitated. She paid me. After the gala. For my discretion, she said. It wasn't a check. It was a wire transfer from an account I'd never seen before. She fumbled for her phone and showed me the transaction. It was a $10,000 payment from Riftwater Strategies, LLC. I memorized the name. Frances, I said. You've been incredibly brave. Just act normal. Don't let her know we spoke. And start forwarding me any email from Genevieve that seems off. BCC, my private email. She nodded, her face a mixture of terror and relief. I had my first witness. And I had my first real lead. Riftwater Strategies, LLC. The prosecutor in me was wide awake, and she was, for the first time in 2 years, starving. I left the coffee shop with my pulse hammering. A staged theft, a $10,000 hush money payment, a mysterious, scarred man, and a shell corporation. This was so much bigger and so much darker than a simple power play. Genevieve wasn't just trying to discredit me. She was hiding something. And she had used the gala and me as a scapegoat, as cover. My next step was a deep dive into Riftwater Strategies, LLC. I got back to Seacliff, went to my study, and locked the door. For the first time, I was grateful for the isolation. My old New York reflexes took over. I booted up my laptop and dove into the public-facing databases I used to live on. Riftwater Strategies was a Delaware-registered LLC, formed 2 years prior. Standard. Anonymous. A dead end. But the $10,000 payment to Frances wasn't from a Delaware bank. Frances's bank statement had a routing number. I traced it. The wire had originated from a small, private bank in the Cayman Islands. A Cayman Islands bank account, tied to a Delaware shell corp, being used by my mother-in-law to pay hush money. This was getting interesting. But why? Why stage such a convoluted, high-risk theft? The earrings were valuable, but not that valuable to a family like the Devereaux. It wasn't about the money. It was about the event. Genevieve needed a scandal at the gala. She needed a distraction. I pivoted. What else happened that night? What was the crisis of the missing earrings meant to cover up? I went back to my training. Follow the money. Always, always follow the money. I was technically on the board of the Devereaux Family Foundation, a non-voting honorary position given to me upon my marriage. I had access to the foundation's public-facing documents, their annual Form 990 tax disclosures. I had looked at them before, briefly, and found them boring. Now I looked at them with a prosecutor's eyes. I pulled the 990s for the last 3 years. I spent an entire day cross-referencing the numbers, and at first, everything looked pristine. The foundation gave millions away, just as it claimed, to museums, hospitals, universities. Genevieve's salary as chair was a modest $1 a year, a performance of pure philanthropy. But as I dug into the other expenses and professional fees sections, I saw it. A pattern. A massive, 6-figure payment, listed every quarter, to a single vendor, Thorne Consulting Group. The payments were huge. $250,000, $300,000. All for vague services, like strategic planning or philanthropic advisory. Over $1.2 million a year was being funneled from the Devereaux family's public-facing charity to this single, unknown consulting firm. This was the bleed. This was the real scandal. The foundation was a slush fund. I ran a search on Thorne Consulting Group. Like Riftwater, it was a ghost. A Delaware LLC. No website, no public presence. Just an address, a P.O. box in Wilmington. But this time, I had a new tool. I still had contacts, old favors I could call in from my DA days. I made a call to a friend who worked in forensic accounting. Hey, Ben, I said, I need a favor, a big one. I need to know who owns Thorne Consulting Group, and I need to know if it has any connection to a Riftwater Strategies, LLC. He grumbled, but he owed me. This is going to cost you a very expensive dinner, Reed, he said. Give me 24 hours. While I waited, I kept digging into Genevieve's world. This meticulously crafted image of the perfect, philanthropic matriarch. It was a lie. She wasn't just a manipulator. She was a white-collar criminal. She was laundering her own family's foundation money. But why? And then I thought about the scarred man. Francis had said he looked rough. A $100,000 pair of sapphire earrings was a classic, untraceable currency. She hadn't staged the theft to frame me. That was just a convenient 2-for-1 bonus. She had staged the theft to pay someone. Someone she couldn't pay with a wire transfer. Someone she needed to pay off. The earring theft, the $10,000 hush money to Francis from Riftwater, the massive recurring payments to Thorne Consulting. They were all connected. My head was spinning. This was a conspiracy. Ben called back in less than 12 hours. "Okay, Reed," he said, his voice grim. "You are into some deep crap here. I've never seen anything this messy." "What did you find?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Thorne Consulting and Riftwater Strategies are linked," he said. "They're separate entities, but they're both paper-thin shell core. And the name on the registration for both, the sole proprietor, is a man named Julian Thorne." Julian Thorne. The name meant nothing to me. "Run a background check on him, Ben," I said. "A deep one, full criminal, financial, everything." "Already did," he replied. "And this is where it gets weird. Julian Thorne, age 68, current residence. A P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. But his last known U.S. address? A federal correctional facility in upstate New York. He was released 20 years ago." "For what?" I whispered. "A whole menu of financial crimes. Blackmail, extortion, racketeering. He was implicated in a major political scandal in the 90s, but they could only make the extortion charges stick. He did 10 years, then apparently vanished." "Julian Thorne," I repeated, tasting the name. "Why does it, Thorne? It's so familiar." "Well, you're not going to like this part," Ben said, his voice low. "I ran the name against your mother-in-law's. Julian Thorne is Genevieve Devereaux's maiden name. He's her brother." I hung up the phone, my entire body humming with a cold, electric energy. Julian Thorne, Genevieve's brother, the black sheep of the family. I'd heard his name mentioned, exactly once, in a hushed, angry argument between Genevieve and Arthur years ago. Arthur had said, "We are not giving that monster another dime." And Genevieve had replied, "You don't understand what he's capable of." The family story, the one whispered at cocktail parties, was that Julian Thorne was a disgraced financier who had died in South America 2 decades ago. He wasn't dead. He was in the Cayman Islands. And he was, quite clearly, blackmailing his own sister. The Thorne Consulting Group was his extortion fee. The Devereaux Family Foundation, her crown jewel, was the slush fund she was using to pay him off. But why? What was the original sin? What did Julian have on her that was so devastating, so world-ending, that she would be willing to embezzle millions from her own family's charity and risk her entire reputation to keep him quiet? The scandal that had sent him to prison in the 90s. I had to find the source. My prosecutor brain was on fire. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a complex, decades-long criminal conspiracy, and I had just found the linchpin. I needed to know what the original scandal was. I spent the next 48 hours in a digital rabbit hole, pulling archived newspaper articles, court transcripts, and microfiche records from the 1990s. The scandal was messy. It involved political bribes, offshore accounts, and a powerful senator who had been forced to resign. Julian Thorne had been his fixer. But the articles all mentioned a mystery partner, an unnamed co-conspirator who had managed the financial side and had, at the last minute, flipped, turning over just enough evidence to convict Julian while securing their own immunity. The identity of this mystery partner had been sealed by the court. Genevieve. It had to be Genevieve. She had been her brother's partner in crime. She had sacrificed him to save herself, to secure her marriage to the wealthy and powerful Arthur Devereaux, and to build her new, pristine life. And now, for 20 years, Julian had been making her pay for it. "I'm glad you asked, Marcus," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. I looked at Genevieve. Her eyes were no longer cold. They were filled with a desperate, animal terror. She didn't just sacrifice her brother in the 90s to secure her immunity and marry into this family. She was hiding a much, much darker secret. The real reason Julian had leverage. I didn't need tab 5. I didn't need to expose the final, devastating truth about the birth certificate. The threat was enough. Genevieve knew I had it. I saw it in her eyes. I had shown her that I had dug all the way to the bottom, and I was willing to use it. She broke. She crumpled in on herself. A sudden, complete, and total collapse. "Stop," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Please. Just stop." The room was silent. I looked at Arthur, his face a mask of shattered pride and disgust. I looked at Marcus, who was looking at me with a new, terrified respect. I looked at Isabel, who was slowly, quietly, closing her own portfolio. I stood up, all 5 feet 6 inches of my simple, practical self. "I will not be removed from this board," I said, my voice ringing with the authority I had earned. "In fact, I believe Genevieve is compromised and is a catastrophic liability to this family and this foundation. I propose an immediate emergency vote to have Genevieve Devereaux removed as chairwoman and to have me, as the only person in this room with a legal background and a clear understanding of the financial and criminal exposure here, appointed as interim financial controller, effective immediately, to protect the family's assets." I looked at Arthur. He nodded once, his jaw tight. I looked at Marcus. He nodded, not taking his eyes off his mother. "The motion passes," I said quietly. Genevieve didn't say a word. She just sat there, a broken porcelain doll, her reign over. I had my justice. But more than that, I had my power back. I had my life back. My time as just Anna was over. The prosecutor was back in the courtroom. And I had just won the most important case of my life.